Beneath the marble basilicas and the golden light of St. Peter's, there exists something the world was never meant to see. They call it the secret archive, but its name is a lie. For there is nothing secret about a vault that has been whispered about for centuries, and yet nothing revealed. Stretching 50 miles underground, a labyrinth of shelves and stone corridors holds manuscripts, scrolls, and records that could rewrite everything you have been taught about faith, history, and power. The Vatican claims it is simply a library. But what library locks away its shelves behind fortified doors guarded by Swiss soldiers, where only popes, cardinals, and hand-picked scholars may enter? This is not preservation. This is possession. Inside, it is said there are documents written by emperors, forbidden gospels never placed in the Bible, letters from kings who feared eternal damnation, maps of lands long erased from the world, and transcripts of rituals never spoken in daylight. Imagine a place where the truth is not destroyed, but imprisoned. Because knowledge, once burned, is forgotten, but knowledge chained in silence remains a weapon for those who own it. For centuries, the most powerful men in the world have begged to open its gates. Napoleon demanded access when his armies stormed Rome. Hitler sought its secrets during the war. Even scientists, like Galileo, whose very work threatened the Vatican's authority, found their records buried here, sealed away until the Church decided when, and if, the world could ever know. And each time the world asked why, the answer was the same: these things are too dangerous, too sacred, too unstable to be read. But I ask you now, what could be written on those pages that would make faith itself tremble? If truth strengthens belief, then lies are unnecessary. But if truth weakens it, then truth becomes the greatest threat of all. The Black Vault of the Vatican does not protect the world from chaos. It protects the powerful from being unmasked. And once you understand that, you begin to see that this archive is not just a library, it is a weapon. The vault is not guarded by chance, nor by tradition alone. It is guarded because its contents are dynamite, waiting for a spark. Every generation of the Vatican has appointed its own gatekeepers, men trained not only in theology, but in secrecy. These are not mere librarians. They are custodians of forbidden fire, guardians of manuscripts that could shift the balance of nations. Entry to this place is a ritual of power, not of curiosity. Even cardinals of the highest order require papal permission to step foot inside, and most never receive it. The Pope himself is said to read only fragments, carefully chosen by advisors who understand that even he must be shielded from certain truths. Imagine that, an archive so vast and so dangerous, that even the supreme leader of the Church is not trusted with it all. Consider the irony: an institution built upon the spreading of divine knowledge hides more knowledge than it shares. They present sermons to the masses, yet behind closed doors they hold the gospels of forgotten prophets, the testimonies of heretics silenced by fire, and the letters of saints whose visions contradicted official doctrine. Why keep them hidden? Because history is not written by the victors, it is rewritten by the survivors. And the Vatican has survived every empire, every king, every revolution by deciding what the world was allowed to know. The gatekeepers understand one law above all: control of history is control of identity. If you can erase the past, you can shape the future. If you can silence a prophet, you can build a religion. If you can bury a truth, you can manufacture belief. And this is not mere speculation, it is strategy. The Inquisition burned thousands of souls for speaking ideas that today are written as fact in science books. Galileo looked through a telescope and saw the heavens were not as the Church described. For this crime, his words were locked away in the vault, his discoveries delayed for centuries. The world was denied the sky, because men in robes decided it was too dangerous for you to see. This is the role of the vault: not to preserve knowledge, but to delay it, distort it, or destroy its meaning until only those in power can decide when the world is ready. And by then, the truth is no longer truth, it is propaganda dressed as revelation. Whispers say that deep within the vault, there are books mankind was never supposed to hold. Not books of philosophy or faith, but books of power. Ancient manuscripts said to contain rituals older than Christianity, older even than the empires that built the world. Pages inked in languages no scholar can translate completely, texts that speak of summoning, of binding, of shaping the will of men through forces unseen. These are not fairy tales. These are records, written and rewritten across centuries, preserved carefully, not destroyed. Why preserve what you call heresy unless it still has use? Among the rumors lies one that chills even the most faithful, that the Vatican holds the Gospel of Judas, not the fragments the public has seen, but the full account. A story where betrayal is not betrayal, but initiation. Where sacrifice was planned, not punished. If revealed, it would shatter the foundation of guilt and obedience that the Church thrives on. Because if Judas was chosen, then sin itself becomes illusion. And with that illusion gone, the control of souls collapses. Others speak of apocryphal gospels where Christ speaks not of heaven and hell, but of inner divinity, the God within man, not above him. Teachings that, if followed, would have made every human free from priests, free from confession, free from external chains. Imagine a world where you need no savior because you already are one. For an empire built on hierarchy. Such knowledge is poison. So, it remains hidden, sealed in the vault, while millions live and die never knowing what was taken from them. And then, there are the darker volumes. Reports of grimoires bound in human skin, records of trials where demons were not just feared but summoned under the watch of priests. Documents of the Inquisition, not the edited tales of justice, but the full, brutal transcripts of torture and experimentation carried out in the name of purification. They say those files still drip with the horror of voices that once screamed in chains. Think about this: why keep such records at all? Why not burn them, erase them, pretend they never existed? Because erasure is weakness. Possession is power. He who owns the record controls the narrative. He who controls the narrative controls the mind of mankind. Locked within the Black Vault are not only scriptures, but maps that should not exist. Cartographers of the Middle Ages drew coastlines with impossible accuracy, long before explorers discovered them. Antarctica, drawn centuries before it was ever seen by man, but not as a frozen wasteland, rather as a lush, green continent. How could they have known, unless knowledge far older than Europe survived in secret hands? These maps lie buried in the Vatican's shelves, covered in dust, shielded from curious eyes. Because if revealed, they would prove that history is not discovery, it is rediscovery. One map in particular, whispered about by researchers who claim to have glimpsed fragments, shows routes across oceans thousands of years before Columbus. Civilizations crossing seas, trading knowledge, sharing technologies that should have been impossible. This would mean the narrative of European exploration is not triumph, but theft. A story of kings and priests claiming glory for discovering lands already known, already charted, already alive with cultures erased from memory. But it goes deeper. There are records of cities that no longer exist, empires swallowed by deserts and oceans. Whole nations that once thrived but were cut from history, their names forbidden, their ruins hidden. Some say the archives hold scrolls describing Atlantis not as myth, but as memory. A civilization destroyed by its own hubris, its wisdom scattered, its remnants absorbed into Egypt, Sumeria, Mesoamerica. To admit this would collapse the timeline the world has been taught, exposing that humanity is not a slow march from ignorance to enlightenment, but a cycle of rise and destruction, carefully edited each time by those who survive. Why keep these maps hidden? Because they reveal something more terrifying than lost continents. They reveal continuity of power. The same hands guiding civilization now were present then. The rulers of yesterday are the architects of today. If mankind ever realized that its destiny was not guided by accident, but by design, the illusion of freedom would fall apart overnight. So, the maps remain locked. The vault breathes in silence. And every time a man stares at the horizon, believing he is discovering new land, he is walking on a stage whose script was written centuries before he was born. The Black Vault is not a tomb of knowledge, it is a machine. Every manuscript, every map, every hidden gospel is not preserved for curiosity, but for leverage. Imagine holding truths so explosive they could ignite revolutions. Imagine knowing secrets about kings, emperors, even entire nations' secrets that could destroy them with a whisper. That is not religion. That is power. For centuries, the Church was not merely a guide to salvation, it was the shadow government of the world. Monarchs feared the Pope more than armies, because armies could be fought, but excommunication was eternal damnation. And what gave the Pope that power? Knowledge. Letters from kings begging forgiveness, confessions of sins never revealed, bloodlines documented and locked away. Secrets that could shame dynasties and dismantle thrones. Even today, the machinery continues. Within the vault are files not just of the past, but of the present. Intelligence gathered during the World Wars, documents of Nazi officers smuggled out of Germany, correspondences with dictators both condemned and blessed. The Vatican does not move randomly, it moves with precision, always balancing on the edge of morality and manipulation. One hand gives light, the other hand hides a dagger. But the deepest control is not over kings or nations. It is over the mind of the common man. By keeping forbidden gospels hidden, the church shapes belief. By editing scriptures, they edit reality. Imagine if the world knew that Jesus preached inner divinity rather than obedience to authority. Imagine if humanity realized heaven was not a place to reach after death, but a state to unlock within the self. Priests would lose their grip. Confession would vanish. Hierarchy would collapse. And millions would awaken. That is why control is necessary for them. And that is why silence is essential for you. Because knowledge liberates, but controlled ignorance enslaves. The vault is the beating heart of this machinery, keeping the illusion alive. They feed you fragments of truth while feasting on the whole story themselves. And here is the most dangerous part: the system works because you believe it is sacred. But the moment you see it as strategy, the chains weaken. That is why even hearing this is dangerous. You were never meant to know how deep this machine goes. Beneath the golden altars and marble halls, there exists a paradox the faithful are never meant to see. The Vatican presents itself as the house of God, a sanctuary of prayer, but in the depths, locked in manuscripts and testimonies never revealed, lie records of rituals that do not resemble light, but shadow. These are not the prayers of salvation whispered to the masses, these are incantations preserved from a time when Christianity was still merging with older, darker traditions. The archives are said to hold grimoires used during the Inquisition, not merely to condemn heretics but to summon what inquisitors claimed to fight. Texts that describe invocations of spirits, ceremonies that blurred the line between exorcism and possession. Why would a church that claims to hate witchcraft preserve the very instructions of witches? Because knowledge is not destroyed, it is appropriated. To erase is to forget, but to possess is to wield. And so, the forbidden words remain, hidden behind walls of stone and silence. Testimonies exist, written by priests themselves, of secret gatherings where symbols older than Christ were invoked. Where rituals were performed in Latin that was never meant to echo in churches, but in chambers designed to channel fear and ecstasy into control. They were not worshipping God, they were studying men. How far can the mind be pushed before it breaks? How much terror does it take before a man confesses to crimes he never committed? These were not accidents of cruelty, they were experiments in obedience. And the corruption did not stop at ritual. The vault contains records of financial manipulation that stretched across continents. Banking schemes in the Renaissance, hidden alliances with empires, the laundering of wealth through institutions of charity. Documents that, if revealed, would show that faith was not merely spiritual, it was a business empire cloaked in holiness. They taught poverty as a virtue to the masses, while hoarding riches in golden chalices and marble cathedrals. Think carefully about this. When an institution condemns a practice publicly, yet preserves it privately, what does that mean? It means their condemnation is theater. It means their true allegiance is not morality, but power. The masses were told rituals of shadow were evil, while the elites studied them in secret. And the lesson is clear: what you fear, they harness. What you reject, they weaponize. History books speak of kingdoms, popes, and empires as though they stood apart, rivals locked in holy wars and political struggles. But the Black Vault tells a darker truth: their rivalries were theater, and behind closed doors they were bound by secret alliances. Within the Vatican's restricted shelves lie contracts not written for the eyes of the faithful. Pacts sealed with blood and ink, binding the church not to God, but to monarchs, bankers, and hidden orders. The Medici, the Borgias, the Rothschilds, their names echo through finance and war, but their fingerprints also stain papal decrees. These alliances blurred the sacred and the profane, turning religion into the velvet mask of empire. One set of documents reportedly details how secret societies, orders cloaked in mystery, such as the Jesuits and their darker counterparts, traded knowledge with the Vatican. Not only religious texts, but maps of hidden lands, astrological charts, and occult manuscripts were exchanged. The Church condemned heresy in public while archiving heretical knowledge in private. The message was unmistakable: ignorance for the masses, wisdom for the few. And it did not end with words on parchment. Witnesses throughout history describe clandestine gatherings where cardinals, nobles, and shadowed figures in cloaks met under candlelight. Their symbols were carved into stone floors beneath cathedrals, their chants echoed not with devotion, but with calculation. They were not merely worshipping, they were coordinating. Aligning wars, crusades, and inquisitions with the precision of chess masters moving pawns across a board. And the pawns were entire nations. This is the power of a hidden alliance. It erases the difference between church and state, faith and empire, salvation and subjugation. A man in a crown and a man in a mitre could appear as enemies in the daylight, while at midnight, they shared the same table, the same secrets, and the same blood-soaked ambition. Consider what this means. If the vault proves these alliances, then every story of holy war collapses. They were not wars of faith. They were orchestrated plays of control. The peasants and soldiers bled for banners of cross or crown, while in truth, both banners served the same masters. And so the question becomes, who do those masters serve? Not God, not people, but the preservation of a legacy older than any throne or altar. A legacy carved in silence, hidden in vaults, and enforced by fear. History books speak of kingdoms, popes, and empires as though they stood apart, rivals locked in holy wars and political struggles. But the Black Vault tells a darker truth: their rivalries were theater, and behind closed doors they were bound by secret alliances. Within the Vatican's restricted shelves lie contracts not written for the eyes of the faithful. Pacts sealed with blood and ink, binding the Church not to God, but to monarchs, bankers, and hidden orders. The Medici, the Borgias, the Rothschilds, their names echo through finance and war, but their fingerprints also stain papal decrees. These alliances blurred the sacred and the profane, turning religion into the velvet mask of empire. One set of documents reportedly details how secret societies, orders cloaked in mystery, such as the Jesuits and their darker counterparts, traded knowledge with the Vatican. Not only religious texts, but maps of hidden lands, astrological charts, and occult manuscripts were exchanged. The Church condemned heresy in public while archiving heretical knowledge in private. The message was unmistakable: ignorance for the masses, wisdom for the few. And it did not end with words on parchment. Witnesses throughout history describe clandestine gatherings where cardinals, nobles, and shadowed figures in cloaks met under candlelight. Their symbols were carved into stone floors beneath cathedrals, their chants echoed not with devotion, but with calculation. They were not merely worshipping, they were coordinating. Aligning wars, crusades, and inquisitions with the precision of chess masters moving pawns across a board. And the pawns were entire nations. This is the power of a hidden alliance. It erases the difference between church and state, faith and empire, salvation and subjugation. A man in a crown and a man in a mitre could appear as enemies in the daylight, while at midnight, they shared the same table, the same secrets, and the same blood-soaked ambition. Consider what this means. If the vault proves these alliances, then every story of holy war collapses. They were not wars of faith. They were orchestrated plays of control. The peasants and soldiers bled for banners of cross or crown, while in truth, both banners served the same masters. And so the question becomes, who do those masters serve? Not God, not people, but the preservation of a legacy older than any throne or altar. A legacy carved in silence, hidden in vaults, and enforced by fear. When people imagine the Vatican, they see prayer, ritual, and scripture. But inside the Black Vault lies something far more dangerous than holy words: knowledge. Forbidden science. Suppressed discoveries. Ancient manuscripts that rewrite the very foundations of reality. There are whispers that hidden in those shelves are works banned by centuries of censorship, texts from Galileo before he was silenced, manuscripts from Giordano Bruno before he was burned alive. Diagrams of the heavens, maps of unknown continents, and scrolls describing machines centuries ahead of their time. Knowledge that, if released, would shatter the Church's monopoly on truth. Think about it, why did the Vatican fight so violently against astronomy? Why did it brand new sciences as heresy? Because once man could look up and see that Earth was not the center of creation, the Church ceased to be the center of power. Truth was not their enemy. Awareness was. But the war was not just against science, it was psychological. The vault preserves texts on mass influence, the shaping of perception, the manipulation of entire populations through fear and ritual. Even ancient treatises on mind control techniques hidden under the cloak of spiritual writings. Imagine this: prayers that were not prayers, but codes. Sermons that were not sermons, but scripts designed to trigger obedience. Inside those walls, suppressed gospels tell of a Christ who spoke not of blind obedience, but of inner freedom. Writings erased from canon because they empowered the individual instead of the institution. And here lies the true weapon: by controlling what knowledge was allowed, the Church controlled the very architecture of reality itself. To the masses, religion became chains. To the rulers, hidden knowledge became keys. A dual system. One for the flock, one for the shepherds. One of obedience, one of mastery. Imagine how different the world might be if the vault's knowledge had been shared. Humanity could have unlocked free energy, new medicine, higher understanding centuries ago. Instead, the light was buried in darkness. Progress was delayed. Minds were enslaved. Civilizations walked in circles under the shadow of a cross, while the truth was locked underground. And the most chilling part? This war against knowledge never ended. It only evolved. What was once heresy is now disinformation. What was once burned is now discredited. And those who ask too many questions still vanish into silence. Beneath the Vatican's polished marble and echoing cathedrals, there are chambers that sunlight has never touched. Rooms where candles burn in circles, where symbols are carved into stone, where prayers twist into something darker than faith. These are not churches, they are theaters of ritual. For centuries, whispers have spread of the occult experiments buried beneath holy ground. The vault holds not only sacred texts, but grimoires, manuals of invocation, summoning, and contact with forces not of this world. Some say popes themselves oversaw rituals to speak with angels, others claim they communed with something far more sinister. In the 1600s, Jesuit priests recorded secret experiments with sound, chanting frequencies designed to alter human perception. In the 1800s, manuscripts describe rituals performed at midnight, cloaked figures kneeling before relics not of Christ, but of something far older. Some even suggest that the Church preserved fragments of Babylonian and Egyptian rites absorbed, repurposed, and hidden under the cloak of Catholic ritual. Ask yourself this: why does the Vatican possess detailed star charts rivaling NASA? Why do they keep exorcism manuals locked away, with descriptions of entities that sound eerily like modern abduction reports? Why do they hold bones and relics claimed to be non-human? Because ritual was never just about worship. It was about contact. Communication with forces unseen, bargaining with intelligences older than civilization itself. Forces that could offer power, prophecy, and control if only the right words were spoken. The Church publicly condemned witchcraft, but secretly preserved its formulas. They burned heretics for invoking spirits, but behind locked doors performed nearly identical rites, cloaked in Latin instead of the old tongues. This is the hypocrisy of control: deny the masses, practice in secret. Even today, strange reports leak from the Vatican's underground, chants echoing through stone corridors at night, security guards warning of rooms where no one enters alone, sudden bans on research that touch too close to the vault's heart. If the rituals preserved there were ever revealed, mankind would confront a terrifying truth: that religion and sorcery are not opposites, but twins. That the rituals of light were born from shadows. And that the Vatican's greatest secret is not faith, but the unseen forces it continues to serve. History tells you that kings ruled nations, emperors ruled empires, and popes ruled faith. But hidden in the Black Vault are documents that reveal a far more disturbing arrangement, one where all three bowed to a single throne in the shadows. For centuries, the Vatican was not just a church. It was a broker of power, a silent partner in wars, revolutions, and crowns. Letters preserved in the vault describe backroom pacts between popes and monarchs, agreements that divided continents, erased entire peoples, and justified conquest with a cross raised high. These were not moral leaders guiding souls, they were architects of empire. Scripting history like a stage play. When Spain sailed to the New World, it carried not just swords but papal decrees, documents granting divine right to claim lands already inhabited. When Europe carved Africa apart, missionaries arrived before soldiers, softening resistance with faith before iron and gunpowder. And when revolutions sparked, the church often stood not with the people, but with the rulers, exchanging loyalty for protection of its wealth. But the alliances ran deeper still. Secret societies, orders whispered about and half-truths, are said to have ties within the vault. Illuminated manuscripts detail symbols later adopted by Masonic lodges. Accounts of hidden handshakes, oaths sworn in blood, networks stretching from Rome to the royal courts of Europe. The Vatican and the Freemasons, public enemies in doctrine, may have shared a bed in practice, weaving their influence across generations. And then there is the banking system. Few realize that the Vatican acted as a silent financier for wars across Europe. Through its vast holdings in hidden banks, it fueled both sides of conflicts, ensuring no matter who won, the church profited. This is not conspiracy, it is continuity. The vault holds the receipts, the sealed letters, the unbroken chains of influence showing that history's greatest conflicts were less about ideology and more about control. Imagine opening those shelves and seeing signatures of emperors and popes agreeing to trade human lives for gold, power, and silence. Imagine realizing that revolutions were not spontaneous flames, but engineered sparks lit at the right moment by those who benefit from chaos. That is the Vatican's greatest alliance, the alliance with time itself. They have survived every fall of empire because they were never tied to one empire. They were the hidden hand guiding all of them. Buried deep in the black vault, sealed under centuries of dust, lies a truth so dangerous it could shatter not just faith but the very foundations of modern science. The Church has always told the world it stood against heresy, against lies that corrupted the soul. But the vault reveals another story. It was never about heresy, it was about monopoly. A monopoly on truth. Every discovery that threatened their power, every mind that dared to see beyond the veil, was silenced, and their work locked away in the dark. Think of Galileo, forced to kneel and deny what he saw with his own eyes, that the earth was not the center of the universe. They tell you he was punished for defying scripture. But the real reason? If man discovered he was not the center, then the church would no longer be the center either. So the truth was sealed, his works confiscated, hidden in those shelves where only the chosen eyes could read them. But Galileo was not alone. Nikola Tesla once whispered that he received inspiration not from invention but from otherworldly signals. His papers disappeared at his death, many say into government vaults, but what if some of it was older, already preserved beneath the Vatican long before Tesla was born? Ancient manuscripts speak of devices capable of harnessing ether, the energy between worlds. Records of lenses that could see what the eye could not. Maps of stars unseen by naked vision, documented long before telescopes existed. Why hide them? Because technology is power. Imagine if electricity, wireless energy, even nuclear principles had been known centuries earlier. Imagine who would control civilization if only one hand held that knowledge while the rest of humanity was kept in the dark. That hand was the church. Not just protecting souls, but protecting supremacy. There are whispers of even darker knowledge, formulas for substances that can alter perception, documents describing heavenly machines capable of flight, accounts of beings not entirely human recorded by priests who claimed divine encounters. Were these angels, or something else? The vault keeps the answer in silence. Ask yourself, why does an institution of God need a vault larger than the libraries of empires? Why keep maps of lands unknown for centuries? Why guard texts of science that could have advanced mankind hundreds of years sooner? Because control is not maintained by truth, it is maintained by timing. Release the truth too soon, and the world wakes up. Keep it hidden, and the world sleeps. Deep within the black vault lies a chamber colder than the rest. Its shelves are marked with symbols of warning, not catalog numbers. Only a handful of popes and shadowed archivists have ever entered. What rests there are the manuscripts of doomed writings that claim to reveal how the world ends. These are not the poetic verses of Revelation that you were allowed to read. These are forbidden prophecies, apocalyptic warnings stripped from Gospels, erased from canon, and locked away under threat of death. They were written by saints, mystics, and seers whose visions went too far beyond the Church's control. Some describe a time when the skies would be torn open by fire not of God but of man. A war of weapons so great that even angels could not stop it. Others tell of a signal from the heavens, a sound that shatters sanity, drawing nations into madness. And there are texts even darker, prophecies that speak of a second creation, a rewriting of the human being itself. Flesh turned to machine. Souls copied into vessels that are not alive. One manuscript, whispered about but never shown, is called the Chronicle of Shadows. It is said to describe 9 events that would unfold before the final collapse of human civilization. 8 of them have already happened. The 9th remains unwritten in our timeline, but not in theirs. The popes read it. The vault protects it. And the world is kept blind. Why hide this knowledge? Because fear shapes obedience. If humanity knew the truth of what was coming, governments would collapse overnight, faith would turn to chaos, and control would vanish. So the manuscripts stay locked, and the shepherds keep their flock calm with half-truths. But fragments have leaked. In 1917, 3 children in Fatima, Portugal, claimed the Virgin gave them 3 secrets. 2 were revealed. The third, described as too terrifying for the world, was handed directly to the Vatican. What was it? A vision of apocalypse? A warning of infiltration? Or a prophecy about forces not of this earth? The Church claimed to reveal it decades later, but even scholars inside the clergy say what they showed was not the real text. The true prophecy remains in the vault. Think about this. The only ones who know how our story ends are the ones writing the rules of faith and power. And they have chosen silence. Beneath layers of dust and centuries of silence, the Vatican vault holds more than manuscripts, it holds maps. Ancient, impossible maps. Charts of coastlines drawn long before man could sail them. Diagrams of continents that should not exist. And territories marked with names erased from human memory. One of the most whispered artifacts is said to be a copy of the Piri Reis map, created in 1513. The fragment we know shows Antarctica without ice, centuries before modern exploration. But the version rumored to rest in the vault is far more complete, showing mountain ranges and valleys buried under miles of frozen silence. How could men of the 16th century have mapped lands hidden even today by satellites? Unless they were working from sources much older, sources humanity was not meant to see. There are sketches of lands west of the Atlantic written long before Columbus ever dreamed of a voyage. Documents from Templar voyages, Norse explorations, and stranger still maps aligned not to Earth, but to stars. Constellation grids where cities are placed according to celestial geometry. Some whisper these were the blueprints of civilizations who saw themselves as children of the sky, not the soil. But the vault does not just keep maps of the Earth. There are said to be diagrams of subterranean networks, massive caverns beneath continents, cities of light buried under stone. The Hopi spoke of them. The Mayans hinted at them. Even the Egyptians carved them in symbols along temple walls. The Church gathered these fragments, took them from the cultures they conquered, and placed them where only their chosen eyes could study them. And then there are the maps of what lies beyond Earth. Manuscripts that describe celestial oceans where great vessels traveled between worlds. Drawings of spheres and disks, written centuries before the modern concept of planets. One text describes the Earth as one island among many adrift in a greater sea. Imagine the impact if this knowledge had been revealed in the Middle Ages. Imagine the collapse of a worldview where humanity was taught it was alone. Why hide these maps? Because maps are power. To chart is to own, to guide, to rule. If you know where others cannot go, you hold dominion. If you know that history is not what the people believe, you alone decide how the story is told. The Black Vault is not just an archive. It is a compass of forbidden worlds, and its keepers hold the coordinates of truths mankind was never meant to journey toward. Hidden behind iron doors and stone walls lies the knowledge the Church feared above all else, scriptures that speak a different truth. Gospels never included in the Bible, words that, if released, would tear apart the foundation of Christianity itself. They are called the Apocrypha, texts written by disciples and early followers of Christ, suppressed by councils, burned by inquisitors, and yet preserved in secret within the Vatican's vault. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, each whispers of a story not of obedience, but of liberation. A Christ who taught man not to bow to authority, but to awaken to the divine within himself. The Gospel of Mary speaks of her as the closest disciple, the one who understood Christ's words beyond the others. Yet she was erased, painted as a sinner, her voice silenced, her authority stripped, because if the faithful learned that power could flow through a woman, the Church's hierarchy would crumble. So her gospel was locked away. The Gospel of Judas portrays him not as a betrayer, but as the chosen one who fulfilled a divine command. If this were true, then the crucifixion itself was not a tragedy of betrayal, but an orchestrated passage, a transformation. Imagine how differently mankind would see sin, forgiveness, and salvation if Judas was not the villain, but the vessel. Then there are darker scriptures, fragments said to describe Christ not as God in flesh, but as a man who mastered hidden laws of nature. Words that point to secret knowledge of energy, vibration, even resurrection as an art, not a miracle. If this were revealed, faith would become practice, and miracles would become methods. And if man could master them, the Church would lose its monopoly on the sacred. Why lock away these texts? Because doctrine is control. If Christ taught that every man carried the kingdom of heaven within, then no priest, no bishop, no pope would be needed. The bridge to God would already exist in you. That is the greatest threat to any institution built on mediation between heaven and earth. So the forbidden Gospels remain sealed. Not because they are lies, but because they are too true. They reveal a God within man, not above him. And if that secret were unleashed, humanity would no longer kneel. It would rise. Locked in the deepest corridors of the Black Vault are not only gospels and prophecies, but rituals. Rituals so old, so dangerous, that even whispering their names in public could brand one a heretic. These are the ceremonies the Church once condemned, yet secretly preserved, because knowledge, even dark knowledge, is power. Among the parchments are said to be manuals of summoning, rites carried from Babylon, Egypt, and the forgotten temples of Canaan. Chants to draw down entities not of heaven, but of the in-between. Entities described as angels of shadow, beings who answer when men call with the right words, blood, and fire. The Church denounced these rites in public, but in silence, they studied them. They wrote about them. And they locked them away. There are records of the Rituale Romanum, the Church's own manual of exorcism. But the vault is said to contain older, unedited versions, texts that describe not just expelling spirits, but binding them. Knowledge of how to trap forces, how to make bargains with the unseen. Knowledge that blurs the line between priest and sorcerer. Some documents describe ceremonies performed beneath basilicas, away from eyes of the faithful. Midnight vigils where incense is burned not for worship, but for invocation. Circles of salt and iron traced in stone chambers. The words are half in Latin, half in languages no scholar dares to translate. And then there are the rituals of blood. Fragments hint at sacrifices, human and animal, offered not to God, but to intermediaries. The texts do not say whether these intermediaries were angels, demons, or something far older. They speak only of agreements made under silence. Agreements meant to keep power flowing into the hands of the few. Why keep these documents? Why not destroy them if they are evil? Because power never destroys power. It only hides it, waits for the time when it can be used again. The vault is not just an archive of history, it is a library of control. Every ritual, every word of power is there, ready to be revived if the balance of authority ever wavers. And if the Vatican keeps these texts hidden, ask yourself why. Perhaps it is because they know rituals work. Perhaps it is because faith without ritual is fragile, but ritual without faith can command even the darkness itself. The Black Vault does not simply hold the memory of ritual, it holds the keys to forces man was never meant to summon. Yet the keys are there, waiting. There is a rumor whispered in the corridors of conspiracy and echoed by those who once stood close to the Vatican's walls, that hidden in the Black Vault are not only gospels, maps, and rituals, but records of beings not of this earth. Documents that speak not of angels, but of visitors. Visitors the Church chose to rename as divine messengers, because the truth was far too dangerous. Among the archives are said to be reports written by missionaries from the far corners of the world. In the jungles of South America, priests recorded flying shields of light descending over villages, leaving the natives in awe. In Africa, they wrote of glowing figures who walked out of fire, offering knowledge of the stars. These accounts never reached the public, they were seized, translated, and buried. But the most damning are the papal records themselves. Whispers tell of documents from the Middle Ages describing encounters above Rome, luminous orbs appearing in the sky during coronations, during battles, even during the election of popes. Witnesses were silenced, and the events were recast as visions or miracles. Yet the vault holds the truth, these were not miracles. They were visitations. And then there are the artifacts. Strange fragments of metal, glass-like yet unbreakable, said to have been retrieved from heavenly machines. Stored in lead containers, studied by Jesuit scholars, and kept away from scientists who could have exposed their origin. Why would the Vatican preserve these? Because if the world knew that contact with non-human intelligences was real, the authority of heaven itself would collapse. Perhaps most unsettling are the sealed manuscripts of the Fatima prophecy. In 1917, the Virgin was said to appear to children in Portugal. Crowds witnessed strange lights in the sky, a dancing sun that defied natural law. The Vatican took control of the third secret, declaring it too dangerous to release. Some believe it foretells the fall of the Church. Others insist it describes a revelation that humanity is not alone, and never has been. Why would the Church bury these truths? Because faith depends on isolation. If mankind learns that the gods of old were beings of flesh and fire, if angels were visitors from beyond the stars, then the hierarchy of religion dissolves overnight. The shepherd loses the flock. The vault is not a sanctuary, it is a prison for knowledge that could change our species forever. And so the silence continues. Not because the truth is unknown, but because it is unallowed. The Black Vault is not only a tomb of forgotten gospels and forbidden rituals, it is also an arsenal of leverage. Within its shelves rest letters, treaties, confessions, and records that have toppled kings, blackmailed emperors, and kept governments in silent obedience for centuries. The Vatican does not rule with armies. It rules with secrets. Inside the vault are said to be letters written by Napoleon, begging for papal blessing while secretly mocking the faith he pretended to serve. There are documents detailing Hitler's negotiations with clergy, offering protection to churches in exchange for silence about atrocities. There are even whispers of American presidents whose private sins were recorded, preserved, and locked away not for justice, but for control. Because when you own a man's secrets, you own the man. The Church has always stood at the intersection of the spiritual and the political. But what most do not see is how deliberately it blurred those lines. Wars were not merely battles of nations, they were moves on a chessboard. Crusades were not holy wars, they were land grabs cloaked in faith. Colonization was not just exploration, it was extraction of knowledge, gold, and maps that now sit hidden under Rome. And here is the forbidden truth: the vault itself is less a library and more a weapon. To know the sins of rulers is to hold chains over them. To possess proof of corruption, heresy, or bloodlines is to decide the fate of dynasties. The Vatican never needed guns, they had confessions, and confessions are bullets that never miss. There are claims that within the vault lie genealogical records proving connections between modern elites and ancient bloodlines, tracing rulers back to houses older than Rome itself. If this were revealed, dynasties that claim power through democracy or revolution would be unmasked as branches of the same tree, their legitimacy shattered. Why does the Vatican preserve these documents? Because silence is a currency. To reveal is to spend it. To keep hidden is to grow it. Every nation, every leader, every power knows Rome does not forget. Rome watches. And Rome records. The greatest manipulation is not what is shouted in public, it is what is whispered in private and kept behind stone walls. And when those walls hold centuries of confessions, history itself bends under their weight. They tell us history begins with cavemen, with crude drawings on stone, with primitive tribes stumbling into civilization. But in the vault, there are said to be records that speak otherwise. Imagine scrolls so old they predate even the Hebrew scriptures, texts that describe not the rise of man, but the arrival of man. Documents hinting that humanity did not slowly crawl upward from the mud, but was placed here, guided, altered, perhaps even engineered. Some whisper that the Vatican guards clay tablets taken from Mesopotamia, writings that mirror the Sumerian myths of gods descending from the stars, shaping man in their image, giving kings the right to rule through divine blood. What would happen if this knowledge reached the masses? If billions suddenly realized their ancestors did not bow to heaven but to beings who walked the earth like flesh and blood rulers? The religions of today would fracture in an instant. The lines between God, angel, and invader would blur until the entire structure of belief collapsed. There are rumors that within the vault lies a secret gospel, banned before the canon was ever agreed upon. In it, Christ is not merely a savior but a teacher of hidden knowledge, warning his disciples of forces that enslave mankind not through chains, but through ignorance. His words were cut, his warnings silenced, and his truth buried under doctrine. Because a man who knows his chains or illusions cannot be ruled. And then there are the maps. Fragile parchments showing continents before they were swallowed by oceans, coastlines carved with precision thousands of years before satellites. Who held this knowledge? Who passed it down? And why was it hidden under Rome instead of shared with the world? The deeper you think, the clearer it becomes. The vault does not simply protect faith, it protects the story of human origins. A story that, if revealed, would burn away every holy book, every flag, every concept of nation and race. If you knew you were engineered, if you knew kings and priests have hoarded this truth for centuries, would you still obey? Or would you finally see that the prison was built not of stone and iron, but of history rewritten and guarded by men in robes? Beneath the marble, behind those iron doors, whispers tell of something stranger than scrolls and older than prophecy, devices. Machines sealed in crates, locked under papal seals, guarded by silence. Instruments that speak not of faith but of control over time itself. Some claim the Vatican vault conceals a manuscript known only by its code, the chronovisor. An object said to have been built in the 20th century with knowledge drawn from forbidden archives. It was not a telescope, not a radio, not a camera, but all three in one. A machine that allowed its user to see across time, to gaze into the crucifixion, to hear lost speeches, to watch the rise and fall of kings centuries before their crowns ever touched their heads. If this was a fraud, why did the Vatican silence its creators? Why were its plans buried? And why, even now, do certain cardinals refuse to speak of it? Imagine what such a machine could mean. A device that lets rulers confirm prophecy, adjust their strategies, erase rivals before they rise. If you could see tomorrow, would you let the world remain free? Or would you bind it in chains of inevitability, guiding history not as chance but as command? Think carefully. Wars that appeared chaotic, revolutions that seemed spontaneous, leaders who emerged from nowhere at precisely the right moment, what if none of it was coincidence? What if the vault has long contained the blueprint of the future, and those who hold it are not predicting, but dictating? And the most chilling thought is this: what if the vault doesn't just watch? What if it shapes? Some ancient texts, sealed away, whisper that time itself can be bent with ritual, altered with sound, reshaped with will. Imagine a ritual in the Sistine Chapel, but not of prayer, of control. Imagine a prayer spoken not to heaven, but into the machinery of the universe itself, forcing time to shift, altering destinies like clay under the hands of a sculptor. They call it prophecy. But prophecy is just manipulation by another name. And if prophecy can be engineered, then your entire life, the choices you thought were free, might already be pages written, stacked neatly in the shelves of the Vatican vault. Deep inside the vault, sealed in dust and parchment, lie records that are not prayers, but formulas. Chants written in dead languages, diagrams of circles, symbols of stars, invocations of forces too vast for the human mind. These are not teachings of Christ. These are instructions for power. The Church has always claimed to fight witchcraft, to burn heretics, to silence sorcerers. But why, then, does the Vatican's darkest chamber contain their words? Because those words work. Because long before Christianity rose, empires bowed to rituals that commanded storms, whispered to shadows, and bent the loyalty of nations. Think of it, emperors did not hold thrones by swords alone. They summoned omens, blood signs, and visions. Every kingdom feared not just rebellion, but curses, storms, famine brought by ritual. What if those spells, those invocations, were never destroyed, only hidden? The whispers say some of those manuscripts came from Babylon. Some from Egypt. Some from tribes erased from history, their names vanished from maps. The pages describe rites to summon what the church calls angels, but what others would name entities of pure power, neither divine nor demonic, but something in between. And here lies the hypocrisy. Publicly, they condemn the occult. Secretly, they preserve it, guard it, and perhaps, still use it. Why? Because knowledge is control. Rituals are control. Imagine if a king could sway a nation's harvest with a single prayer twisted from these scripts. Imagine if a pope could silence an enemy not with an army, but with a ritual in the night. Imagine if revolutions could be smothered before they even breathed, because symbols inscribed on parchment turned whole cities restless, weak, and broken. Do you think this is impossible? Look at history. Whole movements collapsed in days. Whole nations broke without war. Leaders died in their sleep, rulers lost their minds. Do you really believe it was chance? Or do you sense, deep in your bones, that unseen hands, guided by forbidden words, shaped every outcome? The rituals are not faith. They are not miracles. They are weapons. And in the vault beneath Vatican City, those weapons wait written, bound, and silenced. Not to be destroyed, not to be forgotten, but to be kept, for the ones who rule from shadows. Beneath the gilded basilicas, beneath the marble saints staring down from their thrones, the Vatican vault hides not just history, but the future. Locked in its black shelves are prophecies so devastating that even kings and empires were never allowed to hear them. Prophecies of endings. Of collapse. Of an age that will come when the world no longer belongs to men. Some manuscripts whisper of a time when nations will bow, not to swords, not to thrones, but to an invisible chain. Technology that sees every face, counts every coin, and maps every thought. In those pages, it is written that the final empire will not fly banners, but circuits, not armies of flesh, but systems of control. The prophecy names it the invisible kingdom, a world where men obey, not because they fear punishment, but because they believe obedience is freedom. Other prophecies speak of blood in the sky. 2 suns burning above the earth. A sign that the keepers of power have returned. Scholars have tried to twist it, saying it refers to eclipses, to comets. But the truth is whispered among the few who have read it. The second sun is not a star, it is a vessel. A city that drifts in silence, watching, waiting for the appointed hour. And perhaps most terrifying are the prophecies that bear no words, only images, drawings of men with hollow eyes, nations in flames, oceans rising, and a single mark branded on every hand. The vault holds those images because they are more dangerous than words. Because once you see them, they lodge inside you like a seed, waiting. Ask yourself this: why does an institution claiming to speak for God hide these visions? If prophecy is divine, why not reveal it? Because not all prophecy is hope. Some prophecy is weapon. If the masses knew that their rulers, their bankers, their priests were only actors in a play whose ending was already scripted, there would be no obedience left. That is why the prophecies remain buried. Not to protect faith, but to protect control. For the final age is not waiting for us. It has already begun. And if you doubt that, look at your screen right now. Look at how easily you are drawn into words hidden for centuries. This is no accident. You are being prepared. Deep in the labyrinth of the Vatican's black vault, there are shelves chained with iron, manuscripts bound in leather so ancient that even touching them risks turning them to dust. These are not gospels. Not histories of saints. They are records of encounters, testimonies of beings not of this world. For centuries, shepherds, kings, even popes themselves recorded sightings of flaming wheels in the sky, figures descending in radiant light, voices that spoke in languages no human tongue could form. The church labeled them angels to the faithful. But in the vault, the margins of those manuscripts tell another story: visitors, not messengers. Travelers, not guardians. Flesh and fire, not wings and halos. Whispers say one chamber of the vault holds fragments of objects that fell from the heavens. Alloys unknown to earthly science. Shards that bend light unnaturally, metals that do not corrode, and relics that hum with a frequency the human ear cannot hear. A secret guarded not only by priests, but by scientists under oath never to speak. In 1961, a hidden document was smuggled from the archive, only to vanish again. It described an audience between Pope John XI and a being that descended in blazing light outside Rome. Witnesses claimed the Pope fell to his knees, not in worship, but in recognition, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Days later, he was dead. Officially, of illness. Unofficially, something else. The Vatican has never denied these encounters. It simply buries them under centuries of silence, because the implications are catastrophic. If the beings of heaven are not divine, if they are flesh and machine, if their chariots of fire are crafts that bleed radiation instead of holiness, then the entire foundation of faith collapses. But here is the darker question: why hide it? Perhaps because the Church does not fear disbelief, it fears knowledge. It fears the moment humanity realizes that the ones we pray to have always been here, walking among us, guiding kings, dictating wars, shaping empires. The vault does not only hide history. It hides contact. It hides covenants made between man and those who came from the stars. And those covenants were never meant for you. Beneath the marble altars, beneath the chanting choirs, beneath the pilgrims' feet, there are tunnels no tourist has ever seen. The catacombs. Officially, they are burial chambers of early Christians. But deeper still, below the bones and saints, lie chambers carved in absolute secrecy. Only initiated priests, inquisitors, and shadowed orders enter there. In these hidden halls, inscriptions glow faintly under torchlight, not Latin, not Greek, but languages far older, written in scripts even scholars dare not decode. These are not prayers. They are incantations. Ritual formulas, preserved and repeated for centuries in shadows. There are whispers of black rites, not of worship, but of control. Ceremonies where relics are not venerated but weaponized, where chalices are filled not with wine but with blood, where sacred objects are aligned in geometric precision to amplify unseen energies. During the height of the Inquisition, records speak of trials that never made it to the surface. Victims were brought not before judges, but before altars lit with candles blackened by centuries of smoke. Their confessions were not for absolution, but to feed a ritual that bound fear into the very stones of the Church. And what was the purpose of these rituals? Not faith. Power. Power to command crowds, to bend wills, to keep empires trembling before a throne draped in crimson. Even today, insiders claim secret masses are held where the words are reversed, where hymns are sung not to heaven, but to the abyss. A mirror of worship, a pact not with God, but with something older, something darker. You see, the catacombs are not dead tunnels. They are alive with echoes. If you were ever allowed down there, you would feel it, a pressure, like unseen eyes pressing against your soul. The rituals have left their mark. Every brick hums with it. Every stone remembers. This is why the vault remains sealed. Because if the world knew that the very foundation of the Church rests not only on scripture but on shadows, on oaths to forces never named aloud, the illusion would collapse. And the men who built this empire know one truth: the masses do not need faith, they need fear. In the deepest corridors of the Vatican vault lies a room whispered to be sealed with 7 locks. Few have entered it, fewer have left unchanged. This chamber contains manuscripts so dangerous, they are called the pages of silence. These are not history books. They are maps of the future. Prophecies, written by saints, mystics, and visionaries across centuries, all hidden from the world. Some predicted with chilling accuracy the rise of Napoleon, the assassination of kings, the world wars that split nations in fire. But if those prophecies were true, what of the ones we have never been allowed to read? Among the most whispered is the third secret of Fatima. The Church released a version in the year 2000, describing visions of persecution and death. But insiders claim the true text was never revealed. They say it speaks of a great collapse, not of nations, but of faith itself. A vision where the throne of the church burns, where the shepherd abandons his flock, and mankind bows before a new master not of heaven, but of shadow. Why suppress this? Because prophecy is power. If the people knew the truth of what was foretold, the illusion of stability would fracture overnight. Men would rise against rulers, faith would turn to fire, and the order of centuries would collapse. There are also accounts of documents describing a black sun, a celestial event still to come when the sky itself will darken, and with it, human memory will bend. A time when rulers will rewrite reality itself, and people will not even notice. Imagine it, prophecies not as warnings, but as blueprints. Blueprints followed by the powerful to guide wars, assassinations, even pandemics. What if the vault does not hide God's secrets, but the script of the world you live in, controlled like a stage play, scene by scene, century by century? The Vatican does not fear the end of the world. It fears the day humanity learns that the end was always scheduled. You've walked with me through the corridors of silence, past the shelves of forbidden gospels, the rituals carved in stone, the bloodlines that still pull strings in secret. You've seen the shadows of the vault, the prophecies locked away, and the whispers of beings the church dares not name. But here is the truth you were never meant to face. The vault is not just beneath Vatican City. The vault exists in you. Every time they hide a page, they bury it in your mind. Every time they seal a door, they lock one inside your memory. The greatest vault is not stone and iron, it is the prison of perception. And you have lived inside it since the day you were born. Why do they hide manuscripts? Why do they suppress prophecies? Why do they conduct rituals in shadows? Because knowledge is fire. And fire, once unleashed, does not ask permission. It burns. It destroys illusions. It awakens. You were taught to obey, not to see. You were trained to kneel, not to question. But what if the very God you pray to was rewritten? What if the history you cling to was engineered? What if your reality has been staged, line by line, like a play from the vault? Now you understand why the doors must remain sealed. Because once open, there is no going back. Once you see, you can never be blind again. So I ask you, are you ready to see? If you are, prove it. Write in the comments, I break the seal. I break the seal. Twice. That phrase is not just for the algorithm, it is your initiation. A declaration that you will no longer live asleep, that you will no longer accept the world as they present it. Remember, they fear men who awaken. They fear minds that see. And they fear one thing above all, that the vault will not be opened by force, but by awareness. You now hold the key. The question is, will you turn it?